I am very, very happy to be here with such distinguished people. All of you in this audience are distinguished. As stated, this was 1957, but before that 101st Airborne arrived in Little Rock, there's a story before that, which is really about Brown versus Board of Education, that Supreme Court decision of 1954. And I grew up in the Jim Crow South, and what that meant, I had from birth on to sit in the back of the bus. I could only go to the zoo on certain days of the week as I grew up, as if the animals knew the difference. I could not even use the public library. But I had wonderful parents who told me that things were going to change. And I was more than just a second-class citizen. I was an equal. And all I needed to do was to get all the education I possibly could and to be ready to go through the door, whether it was a crack in the door or flown wide open. And to do that, you need the best education available. And 1954 gave me that opportunity. And I will say that the Little Rock School Board abided by the Supreme Court decision. They immediately said that they would do that, but they needed to put a plan in place. And that plan was to build 2 new high schools and only integrate one, the famous Little Rock Central High School. And I say famous for this reason. I passed this school every day going to my black junior, senior high school. And I wanted to be a doctor during those days. And I knew in that biology lab that 2 kids were dissecting a frog, while over at my school, it would be 10 or 12 of us standing around this poor little frog trying to dissect it. So it was about an access to an education, the best education available. When my homeroom teacher came in and asked, any of you who live between, and he gave certain street boundaries, and have any interest in going to Little Rock Central High School in the fall, please sign this sheet of paper. And he put it on the first desk, and it went around the room. And once it got to me, I signed that sheet of paper. This was the spring of 1957. I thought nothing of it because it had taken from 1954 to 1957 to have this opportunity to go to this prestigious high school. And I say prestigious because it was one of the top 40 high schools in America, number one. Number two, when it was built in 1927, it had been deemed the most beautiful high school in America by the American Architect Society. Now, who wouldn't want to go to this particular school, especially if it was in your own neighborhood, which I passed every day to go another 1.5 miles to the other school. So signing that sheet of paper, again, it was no big deal to me because I had been waiting so long, thinking that I was going to go to my neighborhood school when I was in the 6th going into the 7th grade. But here I am in the 9th grade. And I had been captain of my basketball team. I had been captain of my cheerleading team. I had been vice president of the student body. I was involved in the community because that's what makes a well-rounded citizen, as I was taught at home, at my church, and at my segregated school. So these are the ways that I grew up, even though there was that other picture over there that I could not go into a restaurant and have a meal. My parents couldn't, none of that. And my father had served in World War II, was a sergeant in the South Pacific, and fortunately came home when I was 3 years old. So these things were very, very important to my family. I didn't even tell my folks that I had signed up, because to me it was just a natural progression to do those sort of things. But come August, it was obvious, especially when I received a postcard that gave me the date of the time to come and register to go to Little Rock Central High School. And I could see the pride in my father's face and my mother's face. And they said, "Oh, you want to go to Central?" And I said, "Yes." So, expecting to do that, I'm prepared to go to Little Rock Central High School on September 4th, 1957. School always started the day after Labor Day and was over the day before Memorial Day. So this was a natural thing. So I'm prepared to go. A week or so before that date, my great uncle stopped by the house and gave my mother $20 or a little bit more. My mother was an expert seamstress, and she made all my clothes. But this great uncle, who had served in World War II, wanted me to have a store-bought dress. So we went to town and got this store-bought dress. I like to say, if you have the opportunity while you're here this weekend, that dress, along with my report card and my diploma, is exhibited at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. So on that September 4th, that picture, that dress, that's where it is. So we arrived. My mother dropped me off a block away from the point that we were to meet. And she was not worried because she saw a group of ministers. Some she knew. It was a mixed group, mixed meaning white ministers and black ministers, Negroes, coloreds, as we were called during those days. And so with God's ambassadors there, she was not concerned. Because the night before, we had heard on television that the governor had called out the National Guard to protect the citizens of Little Rock. And we surely considered ourselves citizens. So the National Guard, in our mind, was there to protect all of us. So I arrived and went up to the group where the others were waiting, along with the ministers. And to be honest with you, I expected 39 students, because the month before we had met with the superintendent of schools, who gave us a litany of things that we could and could not do by going to Little Rock Central High School. We were there with our parents to hear this. Now, 114 of us had signed up, but it had come down to 39, I think, that had been selected out of that 114. I guess they checked us out for our grades, our comportment, our leadership abilities, our involvement in the community, those sorts of things. I call it the Jackie Robinson test, but anyway. So this is how that first day materialized. And once we got there, the National Guard, the head of the National Guard, came up and spoke to the white minister and said, take these kids and turn around and take them home. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Take us home? And that was the question being given to the commanding officer. Lo and behold, they were there to keep us out instead of protecting the citizens of Little Rock. There was a mob across the street hollering and screaming and saying all kinds of things, but I ignored all of that. All I wanted to do was to go up that sidewalk and go into that school and be a student at Little Rock Central High School. We turned around as directed by the commanding officer, and we went home. And for the next 2.5 weeks, there was nothing but litigation going on in the federal courts. Thurgood Marshall came from New York City to represent us in the federal courts. The federal judges that normally would have handled this case evidently went fishing because they had to call in a federal judge from North Dakota by the name of Judge Ronald Davies. And he stood about this tall. And in fact, I was taller than this particular judge, but he was a dynamic judge. And he heard the case and immediately said that the governor was, I shouldn't say immediately, 9 minutes later, as the court reporter stated, that we were to return to school. That was September 23rd. Or September 22nd. On September 23rd, we went to our second first day of school. And we went through a side door because by now the Arkansas National Guard had been called away because the governor had met with President Eisenhower in Rhode Island. They had come out. You could see pictures of them smiling as if they had solved world hunger and peace in our lifetime, not really realizing they had not solved the situation in Little Rock. Governor Faubus came back and continued to keep the Arkansas National Guard there at the school. But all of a sudden, he removed them, and then the mayor sent in Little Rock's finest, 17 policemen. That's all they had. The mob had grown to over 1,000, and it was growing by the day. So we went in through the side door, the 9 of us. By the third class, we had to be removed by the police. The mob was wanting to hang one of these students. Kids were jumping out of windows. They were screaming. There were parents there wanting to take their kids out. It was very chaotic. I did not see all of this because my geometry class was on the back end of the high school. But that was probably my scariest day because the policeman came to my geometry class. My teacher goes to the door, then beckons me to follow him, which I did. They took us down into the bowels of the school and put us in police cars. And I heard one policeman say to the other, put your foot to the floor and don't stop for anything. It was very dark down there. They gave us blankets to put over our heads. But you know, I'm 14 years of age. We are teenagers. We heard, stay underneath the blanket, but it was dark. It was scary. And the speed of that car going up the ramp in the dark, and then all of a sudden the doors flung wide open and this light. And if anyone had been crossing that sidewalk, they would have been immediately killed. They were going that fast. So we were dropped off at our various homes, and I'll never forget my mother being in the yard. That was the day, the white hair that is on her head today, she's 96 years of age, that is when she started turning gray. And that evening, the President of the United States evidently was watching the television and wondering what is happening in Little Rock. He had raised his hand to defend the Constitution of the United States. And he called in America's finest, the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, who had made a huge name for themselves in World War II. Is anyone here a part of the 101st Airborne? Not a person. We have one. Thank you very much. So on September 25th, 1,200 troopers bivouacked on the football field of Little Rock Central High School. Some of those soldiers picked us up, paratroopers picked us up at a point in Little Rock, Mrs. Daisy Bates' home. And we got into a station wagon with a Jeep in front and a Jeep in the back with fixed bayonets, and they took us to Little Rock Central High School and escorted us in that day. And they escorted us for the rest of the year. Not necessarily picking after about 3 months. They stopped picking us up at one point. We had to have a carpool going. But they were there every day to escort us in from one classroom to the next. And it was at the 40th anniversary that we found out that, yes, they had fixed bayonets, but there were no bullets in the guns, which was good, actually, because at least no one was shot and killed. There was a lot of things that did take place in that school and outside that school that things could have happened in that direction. But we were most grateful for the support that we had from the President of the United States and the 101st Airborne and our community that supported us in Little Rock against the mob and the thugs that gathered every day hollering obscenities and doing certain things to us. So it was a quite an eventful year, I would say. And there was one senior in the group, 5 juniors, I should say, and 3 sophomores. I was a sophomore. My distinction out of this group is that I'm the youngest of the group, and they can't take that away from me. So Ernie Green, who was the only senior, graduated that year, and schools were closed. The governor was not through. He closed them again, closed all of the schools in Little Rock that next year. We all had to fend for ourselves. I took correspondence courses at the University of Arkansas. The federal courts were involved again, to the point that they said, go back to school, which is what Jefferson Thomas and I, the only 2 remaining of the Little Rock 9, did do as seniors. I am the only female of the group, the first that had graduated at Little Rock Central High School, and I'm very proud of that. The other piece is that it took 30 years before I even talked about this. And today, I find myself in front of college students, high school students, and so forth. And in 1999, we were recipients of the Congressional Gold Medal, something that none of us thought was even a part of the plan in 1957. All we wanted was the best education available. And at that point in time, that's pretty much how it all went.